Open on the Wyoming desert, April 27, 1953. Big Boy 4005, 600 tons of steel, hits an open switch at 50 miles per hour and falls on its left side. The tender crushes the cab. Engineer Leo Murry and fireman Lawrence Endres, 23 years old and 2 weeks back from Korea, die before the dust settles. The third crew member spends 10 hours pinned in a space 18 inches high while rescuers cut through steel around him. He dies 2 days later. Union Pacific repaired 4005, put it back in service, and said almost nothing publicly. The world's largest steam locomotive was also, by design, one of the most dangerous machines ever put on rails, and the people who built it knew both things at once. Steam rises from the stacks as Big Boy 4014 glides across open prairie, sunlight catching every curve of black steel and polished brass. Crowds gather at crossings and small town stations, cell phones raised, children perched on their parents' shoulders. The whistle sounds, a deep, resonant note that seems to roll out over miles of track, echoing with a promise of power and history. Union Pacific banners hang from fences, and the company's press team arranges photographers for the perfect shot. Every angle is designed to capture the scale: 132 feet from coupler to coupler, 16 driving wheels, a boiler taller than a man, and a tender that dwarfs most diesel locomotives. The locomotive's name is painted in bold white letters, 4014. Its surface gleams with the care of a restoration that cost millions and took years. The engine moves with a kind of impossible grace, as if the weight, over 1 million pounds, were nothing at all. Onlookers wave, and the crew in crisp uniforms return the gesture. In these moments, 4014 becomes more than a machine. It is a monument, a rolling celebration of American engineering, and a living relic from a time when steam and steel shaped the continent. Official Union Pacific videos show 4014 cresting mountain passes, steam billowing against a blue sky flanked by drone shots and slow-motion pans. The spectacle is deliberate, almost cinematic. For many, seeing 4014 in motion is as close as they will ever come to touching the past. The locomotive's image, carefully managed and endlessly shared, stands for strength, endurance, and a kind of national optimism. In these scenes, the Big Boy is not just a train, it is a legend brought back to life. On paper, the Big Boy's specifications read like a challenge to the limits of engineering. Each locomotive stretched over 133 feet, weighed 1.25 million pounds with its tender, and could deliver 135,375 pounds of tractive effort, enough to start a 4,200-ton train on a mountain grade. The boiler held pressure at 300 pounds per square inch, burning through 4,000 pounds of coal and 1,400 gallons of water every minute at full output. The price tag in 1941 was $250,000, over $5.6 million today, before counting the mountains of fuel, water, and labor required to keep a single engine moving. But the numbers that made the Big Boy legendary also defined the risks. To curve through the Wasatch, Alco split the frame and joined two 300-ton engine halves with a single hinge pin, a 450-pound steel pivot that bore the full weight and force of the front engine. The cab sat just feet from the tender, a mass of 436,500 pounds that became a battering ram in any derailment. Inside, the crew worked behind a wall of valves and gauges, tasked with keeping the boiler's pressure just below the threshold of disaster. Water drawn from Wyoming's mineral-rich basins corroded boiler tubes at an accelerated rate, forcing crews to operate with the knowledge that a hidden tube could fail at any moment. The mechanical stoker, designed to feed up to 11 tons of coal per hour, sometimes jammed, leaving firemen to shovel thousands of pounds by hand to avoid losing steam on a grade. In winter, coal could freeze solid, and the only fix was an auger and brute strength. Those numbers tell you what it could do. They don't tell you what it cost the men inside it. Every design decision that made the Big Boy a marvel carried a price in vigilance and lives, a cost measured not just in dollars or tons, but in the lives shaped and sometimes ended by the machine's demands. The spectacle of power was always shadowed by the reality of what it took to keep it under control. Big Boy's power hinged, literally, on a single massive pin. The entire front engine, tipping the scales at over 300 tons, swung on this one point. Alco's blueprints specified the main articulation pin at 1,800 pounds, not the 450 pounds often cited. Forged from high-strength alloy, machined to a tolerance finer than a human hair, and measuring 7¼ inches across, this pin absorbed every shock as the locomotive twisted through mountain curves. Its surface was hardened to fight fatigue, but Union Pacific shop records told a harsher story. Mountain dust and constant vibration wore the pin down in as little as 15,000 miles, half the intended service life. When wear pushed it past tolerance, the risk went far beyond noise or a rough ride. The front engine could misalign, setting up forces that could turn a routine curve into a catastrophe. Just behind that pivot, the crew worked inside a cab pressed against a wall of gauges and valves. The backhead, the rear face of the boiler, held back 300 pounds per square inch of steam pressure. Every inch was crowded with controls: throttle, water level, injectors, safety valves. The engineer's left hand hovered near a pressure gauge that, if it crept too high, could mean a tube about to burst. The fireman, standing to the right, managed the coal flow and watched the water glass, knowing a moment's distraction could unleash superheated steam into the cab. This dense array of controls wasn't for show. Every system needed constant attention, and any lapse could mean disaster. Physical forces shaped every shift. The 436,500-pound tender rode behind the cab, its mass linked by a rigid drawbar. In a derailment, that weight became a battering ram, driven forward by inertia and the hinge's rigidity. The very design that let Big Boy bend through mountain curves also set up a chain of consequences: a single worn pin, a split-second mistake, and the cab became the most dangerous place on the rails. Scale crept along the boiler tubes, building up at a rate of 0.03 of an inch for every 1,000 hours. Wyoming's mineral-rich water left a stubborn crust, narrowing steam passages and weakening steel. Union Pacific's manuals insisted on tube replacement every 7,500 hours, but in practice, tubes often stayed in service until 10,000 hours. That extra stretch meant a fireman could be just feet from a tube about to fail, with only a faint pressure drop or a hiss as warning, if any warning came at all. 6 times Big Boy's tubes burst, sending superheated water across the firebox and forcing crews to scramble for their lives. The stoker, designed to spare crews the back-breaking work of shoveling 11 tons of coal each hour, brought its own risks. Its perment mechanism, rated for 30 pounds per minute, was vulnerable to ash buildup and worn valve seats. When the feed jammed, as it did on Dillard Hill, firemen had to shovel thousands of pounds by hand to keep the fire burning. Over a 12-hour climb, 5,000 pounds of coal could be moved by sheer effort, while the boiler pressure hovered near danger. If the stoker failed on a steep grade, in winter, with a heavy train behind, exhaustion and overpressure threatened both the boiler crown and the men in the cab. Behind them, the tender loomed, 436,500 pounds of water, coal and steel, joined to the engine by a rigid drawbar. The design called for a fixed-length bar and a central pivot, later revised to a spherical joint on some units. In motion, the tender's mass became a threat. During hard braking or a derailment, its inertia could drive forward like a battering ram, misaligning rods or crushing the cab. Maintenance logs from the 1940s noted recurring tender sway and side rod issues, prompting field fixes that never fully solved the problem. Each flaw, scaling, stoker limits, and the tender's force could trigger disaster. The crew lived with these risks, knowing vigilance was their only defense. Inside the cab, the day begins long before sunrise. 3 men, each with a defined role and each responsible for a slice of the machine's life, step into a space barely wide enough for them to stand shoulder to shoulder. The engineer claims the left seat, eyes already scanning the throttle, the air brakes, and the pressure gauge that never stops demanding attention. Every movement is practiced, deliberate. He keeps one hand near the whistle cord, the other ready to adjust the Johnson bar or feather the throttle. The fireman stands to the right, surrounded by levers, dials, and the relentless heat radiating from the firebox. His entire shift is a dance with the stoker, listening for the rhythm of the coal auger, watching the water glass, and reading the fire's color through the peephole. If the stoker jams, he grabs a shovel and feeds the fire by hand, sweat running down his back even in the dead of winter. The brakeman's world is motion and anticipation. He paces the length of the train at stops, checks couplers, and watches for signals. In the CAB, he is the extra set of eyes, calling out mileposts, monitoring the track ahead, and ready to hit the emergency brake if something looks wrong. Every hour, each man checks and rechecks his part of the system: boiler pressure, water level, coal feed, brake lines, track alignment. Nothing is left to chance. A missed gauge or a moment's distraction can turn routine into chaos. The manuals spell out every step, but the real knowledge lives in the hands and instincts of the crew. They read the engine by feel, the pulse in the floor, the pitch of the whistle, the subtle shift in exhaust. It is a constant ballet of attention and muscle, a human system built to match the scale and appetite of the big boy itself. No one inside is a passenger. Every mile is earned through vigilance and skill. Winter on the Wyoming main line brought a different kind of trial, one that tested not just the locomotive's design, but the bodies and grit of the men inside. Coal in the tender could freeze into a solid block, locking the fuel supply tight just as the temperature dropped below zero. Firemen carried hand-cranked auger drills and steel sledges, breaking up the mass chunk by chunk before they could even think of lighting the fire. The Union Pacific Field Manual for winter coal handling spelled it out. Check the coal for hardness every 8 hours, and if it is frozen, drill and break until every piece fits the stoker's hungry mouth. But machines fail, and when the stoker jammed on a grade, there was no backup except muscle and will. Oral testimony from fireman Dillard Hill describes a night on Dillard Hill itself, when the stoker's feed locked up halfway up the climb. With the boiler pressure dropping and the train still moving, Hill and his partner grabbed shovels and began the ordeal, feeding roughly 5,000 pounds of coal by hand over the course of a single shift. The firebox on a big boy stretches almost 10 feet wide. Each scoop meant swinging a loaded shovel through a furnace's blast, sweat freezing to the collar even as the cab filled with heat. A popular tale claims crews sometimes shoveled 27 tons by hand. Hill's own words cut through the myth: 5 tons nearly broke them. Beyond that, the risk wasn't just exhaustion, it was a boiler crown running dry, pressure spiking, or a slip of the shovel at the wrong moment. The auger, the sledge, the shovel, these were as much a part of winter as the engine itself. Every trip in deep cold was a negotiation with the limits of human endurance. The spectacle of 1.2 million pounds in motion depended, in the end, on the backs and judgment of men who understood just how close the line was between control and catastrophe. 62 freight cars stretch out behind Big Boy 4005, each one loaded and linked, forming a train nearly half a mile long. The consist is a living thing: boxcars, flats, tankers, and a caboose, all riding the rails west across the red desert. In the darkness before dawn, engineer Leo Murry sits at the controls, fireman Lawrence Endres, and brakeman James Anderton close by. Every gauge and lever is in its place, every man alert. The train's orders are clear: proceed to Green River at 45 miles per hour, protect all switches. At milepost 201.7, Section Foreman Ralph Vicente stands by the right-hand turnout. He is tasked with setting the switch for a local livestock transfer, a routine job, but the timing is everything. The ICC accident report later pins the margin at 6 seconds. Vicente throws the switch while the locomotive's lead wheels are still 150 feet from the frog. The protecting signal is left unset. There is no warning for the men in the cab, no red light, no flag, just the rails stretching ahead at 48 miles per hour. The train is committed. The speed, the weight, the distance, none of it leaves room for error. In these final seconds, the entire mass of the Big Boy and its trailing cars bears down on a single, unseen decision. The clock, measured in steel and human judgment, is already running out. At 3 in the morning, Big Boy 4005 hit the misaligned switch at nearly 48 miles per hour. The front truck lifted, steel screamed, and in a matter of seconds, the entire locomotive rolled onto its left side. The force of the derailment hurled the 436,500-pound tender forward, driving it straight into the cab. There was no time to react. Engineer Leo Murry and fireman Lawrence Endres, seated just feet from the point of collision, were killed instantly. Brakeman James Anderton was pinned in a space barely 18 inches wide, trapped under twisted steel and scalding steam. He survived the initial impact, conscious and calling for help, but his injuries were grave, including crush wounds, burns, and internal bleeding. Rescuers worked for hours to cut him free, but Anderton died 2 days later in the hospital. The rest of the crew, including conductor James Walker and fireman Ivan Shurigar, managed to escape or were pulled from the wreckage. The trains consist 62 cars piled up behind the engine, some derailing, others buckling under the sudden stop. The ICC accident report listed the cause as human error, but the physical reality was more brutal. The design that made the Big Boy so powerful also left its crew exposed to the full violence of a derailment. The names of the dead, Murry, Endres, Anderton, entered the official record, but the story of how the machine's own mass became a weapon was left for others to reckon with. The official record closed with a flurry of signatures and stamped verdicts. The Interstate Commerce Commission's investigation, filed under RG 134, Subgroup 100, Box 23, Folder 5, concluded that human error, a misthrown switch, a missed signal, set the disaster in motion. The Sweetwater County Grand Jury, convened on April 30, 1953, reached the same finding, naming Ralph Vicente in their minutes and recording the charge as criminal negligence. The legal ledger was clear, the tragedy had a name, a date, and a cause. But the physical evidence told a parallel story that the paperwork could not resolve. Union Pacific's response moved with a different urgency. Within hours, crews stabilized the overturned engine, cleared the tangled cars, and began the process of recovery. Locomotive 4005 was hauled to Cheyenne shops, where the repair docket, Accession UPA RM 4005 RD 1953, lists a cracked left-hand frame, bent main rods, and a deformed smokestack. The boiler, miraculously, remained intact. In just 68 days, the Big Boy was straightened, welded, and certified for service again. The turnaround was as much a statement as a technical feat. The machine would roll on, the ledger balanced, the schedule kept. Yet the scars did not vanish. The Forney Museum of Transportation holds Accession FMBB 4005-01, a section of the original cab roof and the left side frame plate, both marked with the unmistakable dents and gouges from the Red Desert wreck. These artifacts, preserved under glass, offer proof that the violence of April 27, 1953 was not erased by paperwork or paint. They remain, silent but stubborn, as the only surviving pieces directly traceable to the disaster. In the end, the institution closed its files, but the steel kept its memory. Today, Big Boy 4014 stands gleaming on display, restored as a monument to American power. Yet its presence is also an unsparing ledger of engineering ambition, institutional silence, and the skill of crews who traded safety for speed. The legend endures, but so does the silence around its cost. Every time the whistle sounds, so does the question, whose story remains untold. Thanks for watching.